Here we are. Hi, I'm Scott Simpson.
And I'm Charla Stever.
And this segment, we're going to be talking about the inquiry design model for lesson planning.
Also known as the IDM.
The IDM.
We might reference IDM.
That's right. And I want to be clear, we're not experts on the IDM. It is a format, though, that we've used quite a bit over the last 7 or 8 years, maybe. And have had a lot of experience with using it in different ways and helping teachers to use it. And so we're going to share some of the ways that we found helpful in using that, especially with our area of focus a lot of times, which is implementing Indigenous essential understandings and standards from whatever particular content. Bring them together in a good way for students. So.
And just as the name suggests, inquiry design model, it is a question-based lesson plan or unit model. And that's one of the reasons we're drawn to it. Because when we think about some of those things that we've talked about with our learning principles in North Dakota, especially around learners, being curious and having an intrinsic motivation to learn, I think when we ask questions, it shares with the student, it presents the side that I don't have one right thing, one right answer I'm looking for, but rather we're exploring this together. Right. And the questions help us to do that.
And these are the kinds of questions that you design with that in mind. There are lots of different kinds of questions that people create for educational purposes. A lot of times they're for the purpose of assessing, to find out what students have learned and how much they've learned and what they still don't know. This is not that. These are questions that really are designed, like Charlotte was saying, to pique their interest, to join their curiosity and the things that I know I'm supposed to be teaching based on standards or essential understandings, and bring those together in a really powerful way.
It's not the only way to do these lessons, but certainly it's been, I think, one of the best ways we've found.
I think it's been helpful also because it's nationally and I think internationally recognized. Also, it gives a consistent sort of approach. One of the things that we do is we have teachers develop a lot of lessons, and then we put those on the website as exemplars. Right. When the format and the approach is similar across, teachers are more likely to use that. So it's been a helpful kind of unifying factor for all the different lessons that teachers have been developing.
So what we'd like to do today is just sort of walk through it and share what the different parts of it are, and then share a lesson that we've developed over the last few years, and show kind of how we took it, the direction we took it in the particular topic that we chose. So one of the things I will also mention about this is it really creates more of a unit than just a lesson. We've discovered if you really complete a full IDM using the structure that's provided, it's going to be so much information that you'll probably use it over the course of a week or even a little more than that. So that's helpful too, because it gives you a way to build on your learning.
And by the same token, it's not something that where I would put down my exact script for what I'm going to go through. Throughout my entire
It's not Madeline
period.
Hunter.
It's not. It's really a broader conceptual framework than that I may fill in. I might need it. If I go from notes when I'm leading a class discussion or something, then I'll probably still need to write down some notes on the side.
Sure.
But the IDM really gives you that conceptual framework of where this is headed and how to make sure it stays heading in the right direction. Especially if you're doing it over multiple class gatherings.
Right.
So, one of the things that you should know, we will share with you the website for the IDM. We also have information. A lot of the information we're sharing comes from you can find on both of our websites, teachingsofourElders.org, as well as WolaKotaProject.org, which is the South Dakota website. And both websites have a lot of exemplar lessons created by teachers who are combining their standards at whatever grade level, whatever content, with essential understandings from Indigenous elders. And so lots of good examples of that sort of thing.
Yes. So I think we'll go ahead and just kind of jump in.
Yeah.
And I think the easiest way to begin is just to talk about the different components of an IDM design. And so let's start with the big question that we kick things off with. An IDM, this model uses a broad question to begin with. They call it the compelling question. And the compelling question is really designed to kind of zone in on student curiosity and also connect that with whatever the content is, the standard that you want to address. Mm-hmm. An example that I've seen on the IDM website is, was the Revolutionary War revolutionary? Mm-hmm. You know, we're getting into this idea of the content we have to teach about, but also, like we call it the Revolutionary War. Is that accurate? Mm-hmm. You know, and so then as a student, I might look at that and go, yeah, that's interesting. Right. And it might pique my curiosity enough to look a little deeper.
Well, and I think the thing I like about compelling is, you know, if I'm thinking foremost about, is this actually compelling to my students? It really changes the nature of what I'm working on. Yeah. I mean, I'm very certain about what compels me. I may be very certain about what is compelling the particular standards that I'm trying to address. But I have to take into consideration what's compelling to my students. This question helps us bring all of those together if we do it right. And probably it's something where I'm going to get better at it the more I do it. The more often I create these compelling questions, the better I'll get. After that, if you take a look at that example we're showing, we have a section to fill in the standards and practices. And for the teachers that we work with, that includes both their content standards at whatever grade level they're working, as well as the essential understandings in North Dakota. That would be the North Dakota Native American Essential Understandings. There are 7 of those. South Dakota has the Oceti-Sakowin Essential Understandings, 7 of those as well. And so what we've done in both of those states is kind of preload the template with those so that they can select which one they actually want to do. But that's the place where you know what's being aligned here. We're bringing together some standards, some essential understandings, and making them work well together.
Right. So the next level, the next piece of this is something called staging the question. And when we think about staging the question, we're starting to narrow the topic a little bit. We're building off that compelling question to try to even develop a little bit more curiosity around the topic. One of the things about the IDM is it starts very broad with the questions. And as we work our way through the different components of it, it narrows down to where you get to something very specific maybe for that day. Mm-hmm. So this is the particular topic we're going to cover today. And the questions guide us to that place. So the staging the question is the one that's going to start to narrow us down into where are we going with this specifically. It's not quite to the topic of the day, but it's that question in between that begins to narrow it.
Right. And that could be questions that we ask, could be a discussion that we might have, could be an activity of some sort to really get us in the right place. Right. The whole next section, and if you're looking at you'll see that there are on the standard template there are three columns. We've had teachers who did it with just one column, with 2, or with 3. Yep. I suppose you
could do more,
but you could do more. But this is a way. These are smaller questions that are underneath that compelling question. These questions are called supporting questions. But one of the things that they do is they help build a sort of a scaffolding together these 3 or 2 or 4 questions scaffold learners up to that larger, compelling question, that bigger question, that overarching question. And then these are followed. I think of these as maybe as a secondary teacher. I think of them as a class period.
Sure.
Maybe with this class period, we're going to deal with this particular supporting question and the activities and things that go with that. Following class period, we'll either finish that up or we'll move on to the next supporting question. But then what we have done in that way is we've scaffolded with 2 or 3 supporting questions our learning toward really having a grasp of that compelling question overall. And these questions guide us then, these supporting questions guide us into the thing that follows that, which I think Charlotte's going to talk about.
Something I want to mention, though, too, about those questions is, I think they're important to actually ask your students, at some point during the class period or during this little mini unit, we're going to actually address the question. But what they also do is, as an instructor, they help me think about it in the way that sets me up for not just giving a lecture or a set of content that is, make sure you've got this, take your notes and, copy, repeat, regurgitate it back to me at some point. This is actually setting me up for maybe even dialogue with my students. If we ask the question, are we ready to think about what their answers are going to be? And so I really like that about it. So as we continue through the structure of the IDM, the next thing that you would do is develop your performance tasks. And so when we think about these are the meat and potatoes of your lesson, I guess you could say. It's the stuff it's the activity. It might be something you're talking about that day. It might be a video you're sharing. It might be something you're going to have your students write about, or maybe it's a class discussion. Maybe it's an actual activity where you're making something. At the elementary level, we might be doing something like that, or secondary too. But so it's the stuff of the lesson. It's how we're going to work on learning it.
In many ways, it's what you were just talking about in response to the supporting question. Rather than giving my learners the answer, I've constructed some tasks for us to engage with that will lead us into discovering what the answers. And the challenging thing about that is they may not come to the same exact answer that I would. And they may come to several different answers. But that's also the exciting part, because what creates a better discussion, what creates a better engagement, then, hey, we see this different. There are multiple perspectives on this here. Hey, let's get to the heart of that. And that's also, and I think a big value of this approach, it gives a space to model civil engagement, where we're gonna have this engagement. I'm gonna be respectful. We may see it differently, but I'm gonna engage with you, and we're gonna do it in a way that is productive, not destructive and angry.
Right. It's good.
The next section on the IDM itself are featured sources. Now these could be certainly they could be books. You could have in fact, because ours are the IDM lesson plans that we have are web based. Usually they are links, links to if it is a book, might be a link over to Amazon or some other bookseller to maybe purchase that book. More often than not, because as a part of our work, we do a lot of elder interviews that we have on the website. Sometimes they are links over to an interview with an elder, or over to a video, another video that's like that, or it could be a link over to a document, a Google document, an online resource of some sort. But what's really handy about that, especially when we talk about the way we're using it as exemplar lessons that many teachers can access, the resources are right there. They can click, they can go check out those resources. The downside, of course, is over time, some of those resources, the links may go dead, but That's one of the things that, as a teacher, I think the goal is not to just to have everything you might need right there, but it's to have everything you need to get started. And then you may supplement that with, you may know a resource that's better than the one that was linked here. Great. Use that,
Yes. The other thing I'll mention about this is because everything is right in this document, if you go to distance learning or online learning, for whatever reasons, whether it's pandemic or weather or whatever it might be, it's all right there and could be shared out with your students easily as well. So another piece of this that I really like are the things that the structure provides for what to do once those key questions have been maybe answered or we've been grappling with them for a while. Now what do we do with what we've learned? And so one of the things is there's 2 opportunities to summarize what the learning has been and to create some sort of performance task. And so one of those things is, we call it here with the actual IDM one, an argument. We used a different term, it seems like.
I think someone didn't like the word argument. It sounded too angry.
But dialogue or something like that.
I think the idea is, though, that you make the case for something.
You might choose a side. Choose a perspective and you build off of that. And so, this is another opportunity for that civil discourse you were talking about. Having students learn how to disagree with one another and how to do that in a respectful way where we don't leave, like you said, angry, but rather that we're able to talk through and that we're listening in such a way that we might even be open to being changed.
And I think also how to support my position with real facts, real research. Because if I can't support it, then maybe I need to rethink it.
Yes. So that's the argument piece of it. And then the other one, do you want to do this one? The extension?
Sure, yeah. The extension, which is, I think, I really like this because it has 2 purposes. I think one is it gives a choice. If the argument is not going to work for a particular student, you'll have this second piece that's another performance task that they can do that's maybe a little bit different. And I think the teacher can think through that. If a teacher would like to give choice, you say, here's a choice, here's a choice. Both of these are going to demonstrate your capacity to show what you've learned. But you've got a choice. But the other piece of this is it may be that for some students, they've done the argument, that task, but they want to do more. And I know that happens. I know it doesn't happen all the time. But many times, if a student really does get excited about it, they want to extend that a little bit, and they can do this other thing. And so I think it's good to have at least a couple of ways to demonstrate the learning that give students a couple of options, whether they're choosing or whether they're stacking one on top of the other, do both.
Right. So the last one is taking informed action. And when we think about that, what we're doing is we're seeing, is there a place that my learning can go beyond the classroom? And so as I think about that, it could be something as simple as creating maybe a paper or something, a drawing, a project of some sort that gets shared out with the school. Sometimes I always love to have my students writing out in the hallway where they could feel like they were published, that they're being seen by others. And so it might be something like that. It could also be, if you're in a civics class or something like that and you're working through some issues within a community, maybe it's writing a letter to the editor, or it could be real life things like that. And that's really what this is designed to do, is to make it real, make it something that extends beyond the classroom where we do all of that learning into our real worlds.
I'm thinking back to one of the things that we talk about with the learning principles that were identified by the indigenous elders, being purposeful.
Yes.
It makes the learning purposeful. Hey, I've learned this thing. I've developed this strong and supportable opinion. So I want to communicate it to someone who might be able to do something about it. You know, maybe it's writing something to the mayor. Maybe it's going to some meetings or something like that. So it's a real world sort of conclusion. One of the things that I want to drive home, though, as we get to the end of this, was developed for social studies. We have supported teachers in utilizing this basic format with some, a few adaptations in any area. These are things that could be used in a math plan, in a science plan, certainly in a literature or art or music, anything that where learning is going to happen. This inquiry method, I think, has a place. It may need to be tweaked a little bit. You may not have a real argument in an art lesson, but in a sense you might.
Yeah.
You might say, here's what I'm trying to communicate, and this is why I'm trying to communicate it, and this is how I support that. Even with a piece of art or a music composition or something. So think in terms of this could be much broader than just social studies.
Right. Right. So what we'd like to do then is, now that you know what the different components of the IDM are, we'd like to just share an example that we developed. Now, there are hundreds of these on the website. If you go to teachingsofourElders.org or woolakotaproject.org, you're going to find literally hundreds on each one. In both states, we are not at the state level allowed to ever
create curriculum,
create. Wow.
Or require
or create curriculum. Boy, that's kind of a tongue twister.
There.
And so this isn't curriculum. What this is they are exemplar lessons, and not exemplar in the standard of like top-notch, best of show kind of thing, but rather that they are examples from teachers in each state who actually work with students in classrooms, and these are the things that they've developed.
Real teachers. So,
real teachers.
Some of them you may read one and say, "Wow, that's just amazing! I can't wait to do that. I want to do it exactly the way it is." Some of them you might look through and say, "You know what? There's some good ideas there. I'm going to harvest those and then change it up a little bit, do it the way I want to do it." So take it in that sense. This one that we're going to pull up, though, is one that was developed. Just a couple of years ago, I think, when we were updating some things with the North Dakota website, the teachingsofourElders.org website. And the name of the lesson is What Makes a Good Human Being. So we'll just go through this and talk about the sections. We've already described what those sections are. We'll kind of give you a sense of one way to do that with this particular lesson. So we begin with that compelling question. And in this one, the compelling question is, what experiences have I had on my own or with my family or community that have helped to shape my or our values? So this is a values sort of lesson, thinking about human values, which could be an entry into thinking about things having to do with laws that are made, with norms that are established in communities, policies, things like that. A good civics lesson, really, because that comes out of basic human values. But the big compelling question is, how do we get those?
And what I like about this question is it also addresses experiences.
Right.
So that looks at me as an individual. So what have I experienced in my life that has caused me to have the particular set of values that I have? Because if I can understand that, I can understand why another person feels as strongly as they do about their values.
Absolutely.
So that, I really like that question. I think it draws the learner in. That next section where it's about the standards and practices, that's really just where you're going to put what are the particular content standards that you want to address. And also if you're going to be addressing essential understanding. So in this one, there are writing standards addressed, there are speaking and listening standards addressed, and there are music standards addressed with how this was developed. With the essential understandings,
this one is up. Yeah, it's up at the top.
Right.
One.
So this one is connected to NDNAEU 1, Sacred Relatives, and 2, Learning and Storytelling, and also 7, Native Identity. And you'll find that a lot of them do cross over. That just kind of happens by nature of what the essential understandings are. So, but we do try to encourage teachers to limit that the best they can, because if we just always say it's all 7, it kind of loses its meaning. So, but that's where you just kind of lay that out. You address where it is what it is you're going to be focused on during your lessons.
So a lot of great language arts standards and a music standard. Staging the question. Have a whole group discussion. In what ways do human beings identify and share their values concerning what a good member of our community is, does, or becomes? How do they make these ideas interesting and memorable for their children, grandchildren, and future generations? So this staging of the question is really a discussion where we kind of draw out of the learners, where do these things come from? How do we communicate them? How do we make them interesting? And that, to me, that draws on both their personal experiences, but also kind of extrapolating, I don't know, where does that come from? What would make it interesting? How did my parents try to make things interesting for me to learn what's important? We may get into talking about, Sunday school classes, or a 4-H, or going in to visit grandparents, all kinds of things that are maybe used, or maybe even television shows,
Sure.
What kinds of values do I learn by watching something like Sesame Street or Mr. Rogers? I guess I'm dating myself now.
Yeah.
So
they're still good shows.
I know they are.
All right. So then as we move into the supporting questions, in this case, we had 3. But, like we said earlier, it could be 1, it could be 2, but in this case, we have 3. And so, I'll read through these, but, just know that you don't have to have this many for each of the unit or the lessons that you do. So the first one is, how do Indigenous communities develop and share their values or teachings? And so when I think about that one, that's really interesting to me. When you think about learning about a community and you discover the things that are most important there's almost always some stories there. There are things that have happened that have made that particular issue or whatever it is very, very important to that place and time and those people. So then from there, we'll dig into that question as we move through the performance tasks and other things. The second one that is listed here is, what role does storytelling play in Indigenous and other communities to help pass along important knowledge about being good human beings? And I know when we talk about the essential understandings, there's one just on learning and storytelling, because that's so important. And so this helps us to dig into that. What is it about storytelling that is so important? And I know for us, as we've been learning about this story and the research that's been done on it, stories and narratives help us to frame it in our minds in such a way that it's very memorable. So we do know that. But, so you would take that question then and move in a direction with it to talk about why that's important. And then the last one, how do I develop and share my personal values? So then it sort of takes us to that individual place. So I've had these experiences. I've noticed that my community has had these particular experiences. All of that is helping me to shape my values.
So we've got a kind of a lesson going toward that big question about where values come from. that we're digging into indigenous communities because we have some specific knowledge. We got to get some resources there a little bit about indigenous communities, how to communicate, what's role storytelling, and then maybe think about what is it that I do that helps me clarify that for myself. That moves us into the performance tasks. We have a mixture of things. Under that first one, where the compelling question was about how indigenous communities develop and share them, we have an interview that we did with Alex Dakota, who is a culture teacher. And he's from Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and he shares about the 7 teachings. And so there's watching of that video, and then some journaling that comes about around the learn from questions that are connected with that video. And then those learn from questions are listed. And so there's also an extension of that into the animals that Mr. Dakota shares, and a connection with those animals. And why would this animal be connected with this particular virtue and value? And so some thought about that. Also some extension about listing of virtues from multiple cultures. There's a table that you can use that shows where it's nice to look at different cultures and the virtues and how they're similar and how they may also vary a little bit. And of course, there's a note in there about adapting this to the learner's level, depending on what your learners are prepared for. In the second column, which was the one about storytelling, we have copies of the story of the Giants by Joseph Marshall III, who is also an indigenous elder. He is from Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. He is Sichongu Lakota. And so the reading of that story or the listening of it, he has a wonderful recording of that. And then a sharing of an interview with Gladys Hawk, who is an elder from Standing Rock. And she talks about listening to stories from her grandmother when she was little at night. And then the questions, learn from questions that are connected with her story. Then learners are invited to find a story that teaches a lesson. It could be from a book, or it could be a story that's been told to you by a parent, a relative, a friend, or someone else. Write or tell your own version of the story and what it means to you and what lessons might be learned by others. 2 to 3 pages, verbal or media presentation. And that could be adapted to the levels. So basically what we're learning from Mr. Marshall, Gladys Hawk, how these stories impact, how they work, and then myself finding one either that I've been told or that's been told to me and retelling that in a way that's powerful. So both of these kind of outside of myself, although I'm connected with it. This last one then moves us into that last question, developing and sharing my own values. And this is personal for me, so I'll just admit that. So I put together this lesson. So one of the things that I developed, I'm a songwriter, so I developed a journal that has some of the basic stories behind some of the songs. You listen to the song and then do some journaling about some of the connections that you make personally with that song. And so they take some time to listen to a few of those, sharing, doing some journaling, and then looking at the songwriter comments, and then coming back together, and then exploring through journaling an experience that you have had that brought you a new understanding or lesson about how to live life in a better way. Develop the story of an experience into, and then they have multiple options. And this is one of those things that we like to do, you know.
The
Take
invitations.
You're invited to do this in whatever way works best for you. A song, a poem, a story, a drawing, a media presentation, an essay, whatever works best for you. And then schedule some days for that to be, presented in some way. So, in my mind, these 3 columns here move us from learning about an indigenous way of developing values to a real specific storytelling approach to now what are my values and how might I be able to communicate those?
Right.
This is more than 3 class periods.
Probably.
This might be like
a week, 2 weeks.
Week or 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'll just go ahead and finish this up because we already mentioned most of that, but then in the featured resources underneath each of those columns, we have links to all of those various videos and things like that. So those are right there for any teacher who might choose to use that.
So then as we look at what the summative performance task is going to be, there's a couple things listed here. There's a project-based one where we talk about develop a personal triad of important personal virtues for yourself. One should come from a traditional indigenous teaching or virtue that you connected with. One should come from a story that you've read or which has been told to you. And one should be one that you developed for yourself from your own experiences. Develop an essay or speech, art project, music, composition, or something else that shows how these important traits can work together to support growth into becoming a better human being. I love the idea of drawing from multiple places, because we can get really set on, well, this is just how my family is. So I'm like this. Well, yeah, that's great. And then, we're also in the world with other people and we're in the world with lots of stories. And can we draw from those as well? And it gives a student practice in doing that. So I really like that. And then I like the idea too of thinking about it first and then moving into creating a project with it. So whatever that project might look like, a writing or something that's presented.
And that's the extension, presenting, creating a public time to present to the school, the community. This reminds me of, I know there are lots of approaches to the senior project, but, it would be really neat if senior projects were values-based. I'm going to tell you who I am as a person, what I've really valued through this very elaborate project, and I'm going to present it publicly. So as I graduate from the school, who I am and what I value.
It's a great idea.
So, the final piece, taking informed action or real-world application, develop a set of shared classroom virtues, values, or teachings from the various projects and students in the classroom to refer back to for the rest of the school year. Have a plan for how to make sure everyone's periodically reminded of them and how each person might be able to reflect on how he or she is progressing with putting them into action. I know a lot of teachers do classroom norms with students, set of classroom rules with students where we talk through and figure this out. A set of classroom values